Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
We have Shakespeare and Doofu. These poets create the very values by which poetry is judged. Harvard professor Stephen Owen, who has published the translation of the complete poetry of Doofu, made the comments in a recent BBC documentary about the ancient Chinese poet called Doofu, China's greatest poet. Born over 1,000 years ago during China's Tang Dynasty, Doofu is also seen as one of China's greatest poets within China. But the documentary noted, for the Chinese, Du is more than just a poet. For generations, he has been the guardian of the moral conscience of the nation. Why has Doofu captured attention on the world stage, and why at this particular moment? Earlier, my colleague Liu Xin spoke with Professor Stephen Owen from Harvard University. Let's take a listen.
Professor Owen, thank you very much for accepting our interview. How would you put Doofu in the rank of Western literary giants? How would you describe him?
Well, I think all cultures have chosen at least one or two writers to represent themselves. It's not so much that they chose the thinking of the world, but just thinking of their own world. And the Chinese have really chosen Doofu and Hong Long, I think, is probably the two choices they make. And Doofu is the most Chinese, I think, in certain ways, of the choices.
What do you think the Chinese like Doofu about?
What do they like about Doofu? Well, they don't always like Doofu. I mean, especially young people. And Doofu is made to stand for something, which I think in the Chinese imagination is both good and bad.
Help explain. Yeah.
I remember there's a nice poem by Yuan Mei, the Qing Dynasty, who says, "I can't stand reading Doofu anymore." But that's because he's reading a certain kind of Doofu. So in some ways, the things that were most loved about Doofu also can kill him or strangle him in a certain way. That is, that the Doofu we have is a Song Doofu, thinks of the empire. At every dinner, he thinks of the empire. He always uses the words that have a source. There's a whole series of cliches that go with Doofu that really represent a construction of Doofu which makes him represent Confucianism in a certain way.
So his poems, some of the most famous ones, are remembered for being descriptive of difficult lives. You know, 朱门酒肉臭，路有冻死骨. He's not there to sing praise of the beauty of nature or anything else, but he pays attention to these details, the darker corners of society. Is that why you pay special attention to him?
That's one part of Doofu, but it's only a small part of Doofu. It's an important part of Doofu, and it's always been. But Doofu, you know, that's why did I translate? People always ask me, why did you translate all the poems? And the answer is, unless you translate all the poems, you're not going to see the real Doofu. You're going to see the Doofu that somebody else created for you. And the real Doofu liked food. He wrote to his servants. He talked about Doubanjiang.
Bean sauce.
Bean sauce, yes. He writes about bean sauce. He writes about black chickens. Wuji, one of my favorite poems, is Doofu telling his son to build a chicken coop. It's the classical critics who want Doofu to be very Confucian hate this poem. But it's really one of the funniest poems of the language. Because the doctor said, go get Wuji and eat their eggs. And of course, anybody who's owned chickens knows the easiest thing to do is to get too many chickens. He talks about the chickens running through the house, and I can't say it on TV.
Yeah.
Basically doing their thing on all the silverware and knocking plates over.
I see.
And he finally says, too much of this, go, we're going to build a chicken coop. But he does this with this playing on language, right? Starting off with this grand classical language. He's writing to his sons, and they're laughing their heads off. Immediately out of that grand, high language, he drops down to, the doctor told me I should eat a lot of black chicken eggs. And it's a very, funny poem, which gets darkly humorous because it does sound like government. And all things are going wrong in the Tang government at the time. But you can be funny and serious too at the same time. And I think one of the sad things about Doofu is he's made only serious.
Is that why he is considered to be one of the greatest poets, or is that why he's loved? Because, he of course are pointing out the problems, but he does it in a way that's funny and positive and maybe easily relatable to people.
It's very easily relatable. It is very easily relatable. That's why you asked me how we should get them to understand Doofu, and I'd say read Doofu, because it's pretty obvious,
So
He's the only guy, for what I know, who not only wrote about bean sauce, but also writes asking his friends for plates. He's in a new house, and he's saying, "I need plates. Send some of your," because describes the place very nicely.
Do you think that's why his poems are so much loved and so much well regarded, even picked up by the BBC to make a documentary and try to explain to the world about?
I think that's certainly part of it, because he is responding to the situations of the time. When I write about Chinese poetry, I try not to be too biographical. I think the comment I got was there, people said they criticized it for the documentary for being too biographical. With Doofu, I do a biography because Doofu is writing a biography.
You can't get away from it.
He made, nobody had to organize. I think he actually organized his own poems in chronological order.
Okay.
I don't think anybody had ever done that before.
What do you think is this? Yeah. What do you think is the timing of the documentary to come out at this particular time? What do you think it's trying to tell the world about?
Obviously, you know enough about documentaries, I'm sure, to know that the timing of the documentary is fortuitous. Because when they planned the documentary, they had no idea what was going to happen, right? And so it's lucky in a world where the xenophobia is alive and well in many countries, not just in the States, but in China, in Europe. It's very grand. It's good to remember our common humanity. In some ways, there's the ugly, terrible message of coronavirus is that, yes, we're all human beings. We all share this. We're not like other species. We all are in this together.
Yeah.
And so it's a nice parallel and reminder of our common humanity.
Is there any particular line that stand out from the collection of Doofu that you think would really fit the times, fit the spirit that's most needed?
Dogged persistence, I think, but there's a journey, maybe from Qinzhou on to Chengdu. He's a crazy man, and I would not have wanted to be married to him because he would say, "Okay, we're moving now." And of course, there's no food, so it's a good idea to move. He took the family in the middle of winter with no provision, off walking all the way from Qinzhou and Gansu. I think it's Gansu, I don't know. Anyway, all the way to Chengdu, through the worst types of landscape. And it's that ability to get through, and to see the beauty, the fear, all the things that happen to you on the way. But he made it all the way through.
What's the difficulty of trying to translate poems? I mean, poems are already difficult to translate anyway across languages, and then you have something that's 1,000-year-old.
It's not easy. But remember that Chinese are reading it from 1,200 years later, and their sense of the language is very different from Doofu's sense of the language. And sometimes they need Bible translations. And when
Yes.
they often don't realize how much the words have changed. So we live in a world of translation. Poetry lives because, certain poetry lives because it endures. And to endure, you have to face the cruel fact that languages change. And sometimes poems live and texts live in translation very well. If you have a Buddhist believer, they're reading translations. They think they're Chinese. The Japanese think they're Chinese. But in fact, they're not Chinese. They're all translations. The Bible, there's always a famous thing. God wrote it that way. It's not in English. No, God didn't write English. God actually wrote it in other languages, whatever God wrote it. So that we live in a world of translations. We always have. And even in our own language, things reach the point where they're so far away from us, we have to make the effort to cross over to the past.
Yeah.
And the past can still move us and change us.
Finally, I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you for a tip, because we're doing a very challenging job in a very challenging environment to try to help people understand what China really is. Not just the darker sides, but the whole picture, like the character of Doofu. How do you think we can do better in the way of translating the reality of China to the rest of the world? One tip.
Well, one tip, go back and think about what the young people like in Chinese culture, your young people. And you will find it's much easier. People are holding on to a lot of old things. And I think there are old things that are important, should stay there. But you have to be able to talk to the new generation. If you can't do that, Chinese civilization will die. The old civilization. If you do, wait, it will last yet another 500 years until you have to do it again. So civilizations are very durable. When they don't become ossified like turned to stone, then they can live. So go back, rethink, and try to talk to them, and then you can talk to the outsider.
Very interesting conversation indeed. That was Liu Xin's interview with Stephen Owen. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the CGTN app to watch our show, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you for watching.